Thank you, Astrid, for this important information. So once again, hello, everybody. My name is Slavka Karkošková, and I am from Slovakia, and I am entering this virtual room from the eastern part of Slovakia. I hope that everything will work as it should work. At the beginning of my presentation, please have mercy with my English. I will try my best, but perhaps some of you are much more better in your English abilities. So let me share the presentation. Okay, so our topic today is grooming, relevance and challenges for child safeguarding. And here are some subtopics which I would like to cover in my presentation. First of all, I will try to explain why do we need to reflect on the phenomenon of grooming. Then I will try to explain some definitions, types, and targets of grooming. Then the role of trust within the grooming process, also the challenges to the recognition of grooming, strategies of grooming child victims, prohibiting grooming behavior within the code of conduct, and communities, environment, and institutions as targets of grooming. So I will explain all of these subtopics during my presentation. First of all, why do we need to reflect on the phenomenon of grooming? The answer is because grooming is an integral part of the perpetrator's action. According to the very well-known Finkelhorst model, there are 4 preconditions needed to be met in order for child sexual abuse to occur. First, an offender's motivation to sexually abuse a child. Second, the ability overcome any internal inhibitions against acting on that motivation. It's a kind of disabling of self-regulatory mechanisms which otherwise allow the individual to resist the desire or urge to abuse the child. Third, the ability to overcome external barriers such as lack of access to the child or supervision by the child by others. And fourth, the ability to overcome any resistance or reluctance on the part of the child with a number of manipulative strategies. We need to explain and to reflect that grooming is significant part of this 3 stages out of that 4 of the process of abusing a child. So what is grooming? The terms grooming, sexual grooming, grooming behavior, and grooming techniques have been used in many studies of child sexual abuse to refer to how individuals interact and engage with children and others in order to sexually abuse children. So far, there is no universally accepted definition of grooming that would fully capture all aspects of the process. But I think that one of the most complex definitions of grooming can be found within the book written by Anne-Marie McAlinden, who is a professor of law and criminal justice at Queen's University Belfast. Her book was published in 2012. And according to Anne-Marie McAlinden, Grooming means the use of a variety of manipulative and controlling techniques with a vulnerable subject in a range of interpersonal and social settings in order to establish trust or normalize sexually harmful behavior with the overall aim of facilitating exploitation and or prohibiting exposure. As it was mentioned already, we usually focus on online grooming. Within popular and even official discourses, grooming is immediately linked to the internet, and it's used to mainly refer to online behavior. This is contrary to the reality that the vast majority of abuse takes place offline, and the perpetrator is someone known to the victim rather than a predatory stranger. If we focus on online grooming, it can divert our attention from the many other settings, public, institutional, and private, in which grooming occurs. So, who can be the target of grooming? It can be child or children, their families, communities, all whole institutions, organizations, and even the perpetrator himself. This last type of grooming is called self-grooming, and I will mention it briefly at the end of my presentation. The creation and subsequent abuse of trust emerges as a pivotal construct in the grooming process. Trust enables abuse and at the same time effectively masks it. Trust is a behavior or attitude which permits risk-taking behavior. If we trust someone, we entrust him with tasks that we do not entrust to someone who seems untrustworthy to us. The level of faith placed in sex offenders by parents or carers or even colleagues allows them to take risk with their children or clients' well-being, which in turn provides the offender with opportunities to undermine this trust. Trust is inversely related to the willingness to become vulnerable to the actions of another person or group. Child victims, but also their parents, the local community, and the staff of the institutions often trust the perpetrator unconditionally and unconsciously cooperate with the perpetrator's illegal agenda. The trust placed in the offender allows him to deliberately avoid suspicion and to continue the abuse. It is important to realize that as human beings, we are set to trust others. If we would constantly suspect them, it would be almost impossible to maintain relationships and cooperate. So we gain trust in someone very quickly. For trust to emerge, it is enough to feel that we have something in common. For example, certain common interests or shared values. People consider the perpetrator to be reliable, trustworthy, and are friendly and loyal to him, often only because he shares something with them, like certain common interests, values, hobbies, etc. Grooming can be difficult to capture. It is virtually impossible to pinpoint when it begins and ends. A key difficulty in identifying grooming is that it consists of many discrete acts that on their own are not necessarily criminal or abusive. It may consist of activities which in themselves are legally and indeed socially innocuous, but which are carried out with malignant intent. However, perpetrator's intent or motivation is not immediately visible. It may be very difficult in practice to make a clear distinction between friendly behavior towards a child and something that has more sinister motive, especially at the outset of the process. Recent research shows that regardless of the stage of the grooming process, people may not be able to identify the predatory behavior of child sexual abuse offender prospectively. That is, to predict it before abuse occurs. So, when cases of child sexual abuse will appear, please do not accuse people of not being able to read the perpetrator's mind, his or her intentions. Beware of so-called hindsight bias. What does it mean? The hindsight bias is our tendency to look back at an unpredictable event and think it was easily predictable. It is also called the knew it all along effect. If someone becomes a victim of a crime, later assessors believe that the victim should have and could have guessed, and therefore should have taken appropriate precautionary measures. She should have behaved differently. With hindsight bias, we can easily inflict secondary victimization to the victims, to both primary and secondary victims. If we find out about the child sexual abuse case, it may seem to us at first glance that many people have failed to prevent the perpetrator from committing his crimes. We may feel outraged, shaking our heads incomprehensibly. We can ask, how could they be so blind? However, we need to realize that our position and the position of the people in a particular case are very different. Today, we already know the whole story. We have a comprehensive set of information. We know how things turned out. From our position, it seems to us that things were clearly foreseeable. But in the middle of the story, things weren't as clear at all as they seem when the story is over. Grooming can be overlooked by individuals within institutions through errors in individual reasoning. One of these is also confirmation bias. What does it mean? Once we have formed an opinion, we are slow to revise it. We are more likely to notice evidence that supports it and overlook or interpret ambiguous evidence in a way that confirms rather than challenges our opinion. The effect is strongest for desired outcomes, for emotionally charged issues, and for deeply entrenched beliefs. Confirmation bias among a perpetrator's colleagues may affect perceptions of the perpetrator's behavior. For example, the perpetrator initially made a positive impression within the institution or organization. The perpetrator's colleagues formed an opinion that he was nurturing and supportive of children and overlooked later evidence that was inconsistent with this view. This resulted in them being slow to consider his behavior as inappropriate or dangerous to children. Let's focus now on the crucial type of grooming, child grooming, in face-to-face contexts in extra-familiar abuse cases. This type of grooming usually consists of the following components. First, grooming typically includes befriending a potential victim by becoming familiar with the child's interest and being helpful and confiding to gain their confidence and trust. Many sex offenders select and identify vulnerable children and then use that vulnerability to initiate a friendship. Second, the offender will cultivate a special friendship by bestowing a variety of inducements or rewards, such as money, sweets, toys, or even unexpected treats, such as trips to the cinema or fast food restaurants. This stage also takes the form of bestowing an extra privileges, such as friendship, attention, security, and love, rather than tangible reward. The offender seeks opportunities to spend time alone with the victim. He tells her that she's exceptional, beautiful, bright, and so on. The adoption of pseudo-parental role and the emphasis on the exclusivity of the relationship helps to distance the child from their parents or others who represent a source of safety and prevent the abusive behavior from being detected by others. It also enables the offender to control the victim through the giving or withholding of rewards. In some cases, bribes or rewards escalates into threats or the use of force. Thirdly, the offender often uses forbidden fruit type activities, such as cursing, telling dirty jokes, or showing the child pornography in order to introduce sexual themes into their conversation and to make them more susceptible to abuse. Drugs or alcohol can also be used to make the victim more compliant. Offering forbidden fruits also establishes the offender as cool in the eyes of the victim. This stage includes talking about sexual and other topics, such as marital problems, and that are not age-appropriate, topics that are not age-appropriate. It also includes invading the child's privacy by, for example, walking in on him or her in the bathroom or while they are undressing, or intentional exposure of the child to adult's naked body. Finally, the offender will exploit the child's natural naivety and trust by introducing increasingly intimate physical contact, such as play acting, tickling, or wrestling, and even hugging and kissing to gradually sexualize contact with the child. The offender gradually escalates boundary violations of the child's body in order to desensitize the victim to further abuse. As part of this desensitization stage, the offender may talk about other totally unrelated topics to deflect attention away from the act of sexually touching a child. The process eventually culminates in enticing the child to concede to engaging in sexual activity. The grooming process continues after the abuse, as the offender needs to avoid detection and ensure the child's silence. I would like to emphasize that children need to be protected because they are not mature enough to do it alone. That's why safeguarding measures are so important. Children, including adolescents, are easily manipulated. They do not have sufficient capacity to consider the long-term consequences of decisions and resist the social and emotional rewards that the context offers, including what the offender is offering as a reward, as a gift, etc. As you can see on the slide, there are some pictures describing the fact that our brain has, of course, various parts which do not mature with the same speed. So, the area of the brain that controls executive functions, including weighting long-term consequences and controlling impulses, is among the last to fully mature. Brain development from childhood to adulthood is, as you can see on this pictures from neurobiological research, that part of the brain that controls executive functions is fully mature at the age of 22 to 25. So we really can't expect children to be able to protect themselves against very sophisticated ways of grooming. And with this having in mind, now let's take a closer look at the indicators of grooming behaviors by adults. Here are some examples that are surely relevant not only to school context, it's relevant also to whatever other context for any organization or institution where we have children as clients. So, buying a student gifts, inappropriately allowing a student to overstep the rules, sharing alcohol or drugs with student, taking a lot of photos of a student, photographing, audio recording, or filming students via any medium without authorization or having parental consent to do so, obvious or inappropriate preferential treatment of the child, making them feel special, persuading a student or group of students that they have a special relationship, making inappropriate comments about a student's appearance or excessive flattery. For example, as one victim shared in her testimony, he not only complimented my personality, but my physical features as well. Developing a peer relationship or elevate the child to an adult status in the relationship. Asking a student to keep the relationship to themselves. Using inappropriate pet names for a student. Sending correspondence of a personal nature to a student via any medium. Maneuvering to get or insisting on interrupted time alone with the student, inappropriately extending a relationship with a student outside of work, inviting, allowing, or encouraging students to attend or a staff member's home without parental or carer's permission. Another examples: insisting on physical affection such as hugging, wrestling, or kicking, even when the student clearly does not want it. Engaging in inappropriate or excessive physical contact with the student. For example, as one victim shared, oftentimes he would pretend to give me massage. Testing boundaries, for example, by undressing in front of a student. For example, he left the bathroom door open while and after showering. Entering change rooms or toilets occupied by students when supervision is not required or appropriate. Making obscene gestures or using obscene language with a student. Making jokes or an indirect remark of a sexual nature with the student. Having inappropriate social boundaries, for example, telling the child about their own personal problems. Talking about sexual things they themselves had done. For example, he talked about his various partners and all the positions he had tried. Or in one case where the perpetrator was a woman, she talked about how she masturbated. Asking questions about child sexual experience or relationships. For example, he asked if I was a virgin. He would ask me if I had ever kissed a boy before or if I had a boyfriend. The code of conduct, which is part of the safeguarding policy, should include information on what behavior is prohibited. To many people, this may seem pointless or too strict. However, when we understand that exactly what groomers like to use as a strategies to trap victims is forbidden, then we are more likely to think more deeply about what we should include in a code of conduct. At the same time, we will better understand why the code of conduct must be strictly adhered to. So here are some examples of behavior which can be explicitly stated within the code of conduct. Do not change or toilet in the presence or sight of pupils, or shower with pupils, or assist with intimate or personal care tasks which the pupils is able to undertake independently. Do not behave in a manner which is either favorable or unfavorable to individual pupils. Where giving gifts, ensure that these are of insignificant value and given to all children equally. Staff should not have any form of sexual contact with the child. Avoid any form of touch or command which is or may be considered to be indecent. Avoid any form of communication with a child which could be interpreted as sexually suggestive, provocative, or give rise to speculations. For example, verbal comments, letters, notes by emails, or on social media, phone calls, text, physical contact. Not make sexual remarks to or about the child. Not discuss sexual matters with or in the presence of children other than within agreed curriculum content or as part of their recognized job role. To avoid any misconceptions, the following physical contact with child client is not grooming behavior, like administration of first aid, supporting students who have hurt themselves, not intrusive gestures to comfort a student who is experiencing grief, loss, or distress, such as hand on the upper arm or upper back. Non-intrusive touching, for example, shaking a student's hand or a pat on the back to congratulate a student or whatever child. To better understand the impact of the grooming on the victims, I highly recommend you to watch the really unique documentary entitled Groomed. It was released just a few weeks ago. It is an intimate story of a filmmaker, Gwen Van de Pas, as she returns to her hometown in search of answers about the man who sexually abused her as a child. To understand her ongoing traumas, Gwen travels to meet survivors, psychologists, and even a convicted sex offender, but a different one, not hers. The film addresses a common yet unknown manipulation type called grooming, how to recognize it, and ultimately how to stop it. What begins as an exploration into grooming becomes a dramatic journey where Gwen faces unexpected revelations in her case. It means that she will discover that there are more victims in her case. And finally, she finds her anger, which she had problems to feel for a long time, which was the impact of grooming. She boldly confronts the evil we would rather ignore. So I really highly recommend you to watch this great movie. The target of grooming can also be a community that further guards access to a certain child or several children. Some experts also use the term environmental grooming. Many perpetrators try to build a good reputation and to create a strong social perception of themselves as being a trustworthy and dependable members of the local community, a charming or nice man, exceptionally kind to children or helpful to adults. Offenders often make themselves indispensable to the local community by undertaking jobs that other people are reluctant to do. The community is often affected by grooming to such an extent that if the victim makes a disclosure, the community will support the perpetrator rather than the victim, because the social perception of the offender is that they are considered more believable than the child victims. This is really dangerous. In one case, the family which reported the abuse to the police, where the parents of the victim were confronted experience a special type of this impact of community grooming. Some people from their neighborhood told those parents, because of one or two victims, you want to ruin his life. The perpetrator was really a man who had a very good reputation, very positive image in that small town, and the community members tend to support the perpetrator rather than the victim, even in a case when there were more than one victim. With regard to this type of grooming, one more point needs to be made. Affinity groups, religious, political, or social groups in which all members share common values or beliefs are particularly vulnerable to grooming because of the collective trust that members of these groups have in one another. As long as the groomer can accurately espouse these beliefs while in the presence of group members, the true motives are less likely to be discovered. The group trusts him and tends to stand up for him. We have a simplistic idea that the perpetrators are some monsters that we can easily identify and keep at a safe distance from them. Mostly, however, they are ordinary people. They do not have to look like villains. They can be nice, kind, charming, popular. They could have done a lot of good things in life, which makes them respected, grateful, or willing to makes us grateful or willing to forgive them a lot. The more we more we know and love a person, the less we believe he could be or she could be a perpetrator. The fact that child sexual abuse perpetrators are people who have the image of trusted people is almost indigestible information for our psyche. Not trusting the victims is mentally much more easier than admitting that one of our loved ones, admired ones, could be the perpetrator. Here are some factors which assist environmental grooming. It can be position, charm, power, celebrity. For the position, there can be various elements like social position, status derived from occupation or role, or it can be personal position, status derived from deeds or ability to reward others. In case of charm, the elements can be something within the personality, affect, looks, verbal skills, listening ability, etc. In case of power, the elements can be political power, power derived from position or role. It can be fiscal power derived from wealth or control of resources, or it can be kind of absolute power, physical or tyrannical power. And in case of this celebrity factor, it's about fame derived from the authority. In this regard, I recommend you to watch these movies. The first one is At the Heart of Gold, inside the USA gymnastics scandal. The film follows the sex abuse scandal surrounding USA gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar, interviewing gymnasts who used to be under his care and detailing the factors that allowed the situation to persist. The document was released in 2019, and it captures how Larry Nassar effectively manipulated the victims and the entire community. They did not perceive him as a predator. They considered him a wonderful person. They loved him, they adored him, not only victims, but also the people from the surroundings, from the environment, also his colleagues and people from the community. Another movie or documentary, which I really recommend you to watch, is Jimmy Savile, a British horror story. It's a two-part Netflix documentary series released just a few weeks ago in April 2022. It looks at the life of career of the British television personality Jimmy Savile, his history of committing sexual abuse, and the scandal that occurred after his death in 2011, when numerous complaints were raised about his behavior. But when he was still alive, it was like impossible to catch him and to confront him with his criminal deeds. He was so much protected by his by the power he gains from his celebrity and charm, and from his philanthropic endeavors. And the last type of grooming I would like to mention in this webinar is institutional grooming. This type of grooming has several aspects or variants. It primarily involves grooming of children within an institutional context where sex offenders appear to make use of unique features of the organizational environment to facilitate abuse and avoid detection. The offender success can be enhanced by access to resources and status within the organization. The institutional elements that can help the perpetrator's intentions are, for example, solo work, lack of physical boundaries between children and staff, missing or insufficient safeguarding measures, etc. Grooming within the institution can also be targeted at colleagues. Its purpose is to divert the suspicion or attention of those who would provide a source of safety or support for the child. The perpetrators will gain popularity through grooming of colleagues. Among employees and children, the perpetrators are often the most popular one. They tend to be perceived very positively. In some cases, they hide behind their position, which may even be linked to child protection. When they are perceived in this light, people suppose that whatever they do, it must be okay. Colleagues may be either unaware of the abuse or partially aware but fail to act on that information. The popularity of an individual member of staff may disempower other staff and make them reluctant or less willing to challenge suspicious or inappropriate behavior for fear of undermining their own position within the organization. Professionals and volunteers need to understand that they too can be target of grooming. If the suspected perpetrator is someone they trust, their capacity to trust the victims can be weakened. The impact of grooming can thus be a breeding ground for the secondary victimization of victims. This is important to consider when dealing with cases and victims. With regard to this last type of grooming, one more point needs to be made. Offenders may adopt suffering manipulation styles where they self-represent as a martyr or victims in need of sympathy and support. It is very probable that perpetrators will respond with Darvo technique when suspicion or accusation appear within institution or community. What is Darvo? You can see it on the slide. Darvo is defined as a reaction perpetrators of wrongdoing, particularly sexual offenders, may display in response to being held accountable for their behavior. It consists of 3 steps. Darvo is an acronym derived from 3 steps: deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender roles. So first step is that perpetrator denies the behavior. Second step, perpetrator attacks the whistleblower or the victim. And the third step, harm doer claims victimhood, frames victim as aggressor. There are several researches which show us that Darvo, when somebody uses Darvo technique, it can trigger feelings of self-blame in victims. If the victim or whistleblower dare to make a disclosure and the response is using Darvo technique, then it has a huge impact on victims or whistleblowers. It weakens them a lot. Research also finds that it is effective at discrediting victims, which means that people who see this Darvo technique without being aware it's Darvo manipulating technique, these people, when they listen to the accused person, then tend to believe the offender more than the victim. But the promising research results are that learning about Darvo technique can reduce its impact. It has to be I have to say that it is very easy for offenders to use this Darvo technique. Why? This is because they have adopted a range of cognitive distortions, excuses, and rationalizations, oh my God, which neutralize any feelings of guilt, shame, and responsibility for abuse. So do not expect the perpetrators to confess, regret their actions, and repent. It's much more probable that they will use Darvo technique. So be aware of this. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention. So I made it within less than 1 hour.